Morning, everyone. Welcome to Build Day 3. Our session is called Coding Enterprise Apps, and we're going to be talking about Microsoft Intune, more specifically related to the Intune Graph APIs alongside the Microsoft Intune App Protection Policy SDK. My name is Xamarin Maybe, and I'm a program manager based in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And with me I have Kyle, who's a software engineer on my team, and Dave Randall, who's a senior program manager based here in Redmond as well. So in terms of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about some of the integration areas available with Microsoft Intune, go into the client app SDK, and Kyle's going to do a demo about how to use our SDK for your Xamarin apps, and the resultant policies that get applied as a benefit of doing this work. And Dave's going to go into some automation and data access via the Microsoft Graph. So Intune is basically a mobile device management software, and we also do mobile application management. So we have a bunch of integrations that you can take advantage of, including checking for device compliance, telecom expense management, mobile threat defense. We partner with three popular vendors in the industry in order for you as an IT admin to get the benefits of these MTD vendors alongside your Intune deployments. Software inventory, data warehouse, the Microsoft Graph API as mentioned, and what me and Kyle are going to go into is app protection policies. So this is kind of an overview of what Intune integrates with. Basically, all of these boxes represent some APIs that you can call. Mobile threat defense, the partners that we integrate with are on the left over there. And the Intune Client App SDK is currently in all the core Office apps, and all upcoming Office apps, even the small, medium business ones, are looking to integrate the core, the Intune App SDK in order to have kind of a container-like experience on end-user devices. We're using Office apps alongside any third-party apps that have the Intune SDK integrated, along with LOB apps that have wrapped with the Intune SDK or also integrated. So I'm going to get into Microsoft Intune App SDK. So what are app protection policies? Basically, we're going to talk about what kind of features get enabled once you have done the work to integrate the SDK. Alongside how you can do this, there are a couple of tools that we have offered. We have something called the Intune App Wrapping tool, which is more targeted to IT admins who don't necessarily have access to the source code, but do have the right signing credentials in order to be able to do this. And then we have the SDK, which requires a little bit more access to the source code and a little bit more work, alongside the Xamarin bindings, which are specifically targeted to Xamarin-based apps. And that's what Kyle will be demoing for us and showing the resultant policies that get enabled after doing this for a sample app. We're going to talk a little bit about moving forward, what's coming up, and then how to contact us. There's going to be a link to kind of more resources, so if you guys can maybe just take a picture of the slide, or if you're available later today, come by our booth, and we can talk a little bit more about troubleshooting or just where to learn more about what we do. So what are Intune app protection policies? So I think this diagram does a pretty good job of explaining what we're trying to enable. So we're trying to protect and separate corporate apps, data, and identities from personal ones. So for apps like Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, which have the multi-identity concept, we tie any corporate app protection policies to the corporate identity, and the personal data stay separate. So you can apply selective wipes to just your corporate identity and any related data on the device that's tied to that corporate identity. As I mentioned before, app protection policies are built into Microsoft Office and productivity apps. They're built into some third-party apps. I can go into kind of a quick slide about what apps we currently have available, and we have more third parties interested in trying to become a part of the ecosystem. And you can also enable APP in your own apps, which is what we're going to talk about today as well. So this is just a quick overview of the app ecosystem. So at the top we have our Microsoft apps. You can see all the core apps listed there, and then some partner apps that are also integrated with the Intune SDK. Typically, these are the ones that have a lot of interaction with the Office apps as well, which is why it's just a cleaner experience when they have app protection policies targeted to them as well. So just to give a little background on who would be using our product. So we have Steve, an IT admin, and Steve's been in charge of basically managing their end user devices for Contoso, which is an organization that he works for. And he's been in charge of applying app protection policies to his end users alongside the apps that the app protection policies should be applied to and the user groups which should receive these policies. So he's noticed that he's been able to apply to the available apps in the console today, but he's noticed that his own company has a lot of line of business apps that he believes would benefit from being able to transfer data from and out of the Office apps and the other apps that are currently targeted. And in order to enable this, they either have to be wrapped with the Intune App Wrapper or integrated with the SDK. That's where Jane comes in. Jane's an app developer, and so her job would be to enable this and pass on the enabled LOB app to Steve, and he can upload it into console, make it available, and finish doing his targeting. So these are the tools that I mentioned. So the app wrapping tool is a command line tool available for Android and iOS. There are no code changes required to your app, and it's used. The use case is for LOB apps. If you do have an app that you want to release to the App Store, we recommend that you use the Intune App SDK. It has a little bit more functionality in terms of all the multi-identity scenarios where you can target based off of the corporate identity signed into an app. And it can be used for store and LOB apps. And then the last thing is the Xamarin bindings. Basically what this is APP functionality for Xamarin-based apps. We recently released our revamped Xamarin bindings last month for iOS and Android. So if you guys are Xamarin developers and have some feedback, I know we talked a little bit with some of you before the session, but we would love to hear it and try to make this experience better for you. Now that I think about it, how many of you are familiar with Intune? Just a show of hands. Awesome. And then how many of you use Intune? Super cool. And then in terms of Xamarin, how many of you are Xamarin developers? Okay, all right. So why would your app need to be Intune enabled? Mentioned this a little bit, just hoping this slide will kind of simplify things and clarify things a little bit. So your app has data that needs to be protected. And your app has integration with Office applications, and then your app has a requirement not to launch on jailbroken devices. So what we do is there's a couple of settings, such as detecting whether or not the device that the app is being launched on is rooted or jailbroken, requiring a specific minimum OS version, minimum Android patch version, or minimum app version itself before you can launch the app with that corporate identity that it's tied to. And then there's also save as restrictions, where you can save documents, corporate documents, only to specified locations by the IT admin, on top of some data transfer policies where you can determine if you can transfer data within managed apps only, or from managed apps or from unmanaged apps. So there's a couple of customization options there. And then also restricting cut, copy, paste from managed apps to an app like Twitter, for example. So the Intune SDK can also enable these scenarios. So for our authentication, we use the ADAL library, and then we have some custom app configuration policies that you can use Intune console for as well, and that you do not need MDM enrollment. So APP policies, you do not require your end users' devices to be enrolled into the Intune company portal app. And then access on-prem resources with Azure App Proxy, which some of you may have heard of, and then the Citrix NetScaler integration. that we're working on as well. So in terms of using the app wrapping tool versus the SDK, mentioned this as well, but the app wrapping tool is typically used by the IT admins who can just download this command line tool and put in the required parameters, the path to the app and the signing certificate information, and you're able to kind of wrap the app and have it ready to go. In terms of the SDK, if your app is a little bit complex in functionality, or if it's going to be released to the public app store for use with even non-Intune customers, you should be using the SDK. And then if your app supports multi-identity, all of those features you will need to use the SDK for. And then if you have any custom flows that your app wants to support, and obviously we expect this to be used by the developers who are more familiar with the code. So the SDK exclusive features are multi-identity, selective wipe, which I mentioned, some save as controls for storage locations, style customization if you'd like to have an Intune badge on your app, for example, some notifications, and basically app config for non-enrolled devices is what the last point is trying to say. So before Kyle gets into the demo, we would like to highlight that we released what we're calling the Xamarin bindings last month, and they're available for Android and iOS. And we have sample apps that have released on iOS. The Android and Xamarin Forms versions of our sample apps are coming shortly. I'm going to pass it on to Kyle, who's going to go through a demo for us and show us how to enable some app protection policies on his Xamarin-based iOS app.
Excuse me, sorry. How's it going, folks? I'm going to be running through a demo of our sample Xamarin.iOS app, which as of last night is now publicly available and open source on GitHub, so you can get it at github.com/msintuneappsdk. And as Aswari mentioned, we've got similar samples coming for Xamarin.Android and a Xamarin Forms app, which features shared logic across Android and iOS, so stay tuned for that. So yeah, let's get right into it and go ahead and start debugging. So you'll see here our app basically just includes, our Xamarin bindings are available as a NuGet package. We're just including the intune.mam.xamarin.ios package here. When the app initially launches, we haven't authenticated, and so we're in an unmanaged context at this point. I'm just going to go ahead and run through a few scenarios here to show you guys what things look like before we've enrolled and received app protection policies, and what happens after you've enrolled, and what the logic to enable all of that functionality actually looks like. Here we are. We're in an unmanaged context. You can picture, oops, looks like I accidentally hit a button there. And did it again. So you can picture this being potentially a corporate enterprise app that's got corporate data in it, and I'm just an individual worker at my organization, and I decide I want to copy some text out of this app and maybe go into my personal messages and text it to a friend of mine, or potentially go onto social media and post it or share it via that. Those channels might not necessarily be what an IT admin would want their end users doing with their corporate data. If we go ahead and hit this open URL button here to launch the URL in this text box, you'll see I'm taken into Safari, so I can reach potential corporate endpoints in the context of an unmanaged browser that doesn't include the Intune SDK or any sort of app protection. Again, not necessarily what an IT pro would want. if we hit this share content button, you'll see here, we're in a simulator right now, so there aren't any apps available that could handle sharing text, but you can see I've got these system level options available in the share UI. Again, as a corporate or as an IT pro, I might be a little worried about where my users are sharing their corporate data to. And if I hit this file here, this button here, which enables saving a file locally to the device, you'll see I get this little message letting me know that I was able to do that. So now let's see what happens after we authenticate and enroll with the Intune MAM service and get our app protection policies. And before we do that, whoops, sorry about that. We're going to go ahead and take a look at what we've got set for policies for the user that we're going to enroll with. So you can see here, we've got the allow app to transfer data to other apps policy set to none, which means it should be blocked entirely. We have prevent save as set to yes. And we've specified that we specifically want to block save as to local storage. We've got restrict cut, copy, and paste to policy managed apps only. We've got restrict web content to display in the managed browser, which is the managed browser is a Intune branded browser that's available in the public app stores for iOS and Android, which includes our SDK. And we've also got policy set to require PIN, although we haven't set policy to require a complex PIN so that I don't have to think of a complex PIN on the fly for you folks. So yeah, let's see what happens when we go ahead and authenticate. So let's do that. And just to take a look at what that logic actually looks like. Here is our touch up inside handler for the login button. And you can see all we're doing is calling the Intune MAM Enrollment Manager instances login and enroll account API. So that's right here. And basically just passing in the content of the URL field, of the email field. And so we'll go ahead and hit login, and we get this ADOL prompt. And we'll go ahead and enter our credentials. And right now we're enrolling and pulling down our app protection policies, and we get this nice message letting the end user know, hey, your IT admin is now helping you protect data in this app. And you see we get this nice PIN prompt, and as I mentioned, we're not requiring complex PIN here, so we'll keep things simple. And now let's see what happens when I go ahead and run through all those same scenarios. So let's go ahead and try, try pasting into a unmanaged context again. So let's get rid of this here and give that a shot. You see I'm given this nice little message letting me know, hey, my organization doesn't allow me to paste into this context. But if you remembered, we set policy to allow copy and paste between managed applications. I don't have another managed app here, but if I go back into the same app and attempt to paste, you'll see I'm able to successfully do that. If I attempt to open a URL, you'll see that I get prompted to go to the App Store and install the managed browser to help keep me in a managed context. Because we're in simulator, there is no App Store here, so I'm not going to go ahead and do that. But basically, I'd be taken to the App Store, have the managed browser installed, and then navigate to the URL I open. If I go and try to share some content, you'll remember we set policy to block that entirely, so all the options get filtered out of the UI here. And what's interesting about everything I've shown you guys thus far, let's go ahead and take a look at the code for all of it. So basically, none of what I just showed you, the PIN UI, opening a managed link or copy and paste required, or even the share work requires the app developer to do anything at all. So you'll see here, this is our URL, open URL button handler, and you'll see there's absolutely no Intune specific logic in here. It's all, the app is basically just going ahead and calling open URL on the string, and basically the Intune SDK handles enforcing the policy without the developer having to actually worry about it. So it's basically, the developer just has to worry about implementing their app functionality and letting the Intune SDK handle pulling down policy and enforcing it. Same thing here with the share UI, with the share button. We're just showing a UI activity view controller. There's absolutely nothing Intune specific going on here. We don't even have to worry about checking the policy and enforcing it ourselves. Copy and paste was the same thing. So yeah. Now, save as is one exception to the rule where we actually do need the app to help us enforce that. So what we do there is we actually just expose the policy value via our Intune Man policy managers instances is safe to allowed for location. So you can see here we're basically just doing a simple check to see if, hey, is save to the local drive blocked? As you can see, so it's an is allowed call, but we're doing a not here. So basically, if it's disallowed, we go ahead and just put up this alert saying, hey, sorry, not allowed. Otherwise, we just go ahead and save the file locally. So pretty simple, pretty minimal investment. And as you can see here, when we go ahead and hit the save file button, we get that block message. So yeah, that's just a little rundown of an iOS app built with Xamarin. Our Xamarin bindings essentially have an equivalent C# API for all the APIs available in our native SDK. So there really shouldn't be anything blocking you from doing whatever you want to do in your Xamarin binding, in your Xamarin app that you could do in a native app. So yeah, with that, I'll hand it back to Aswari.
Thanks, Kyle.
Yep.
So as I mentioned before, as we released our first version of the Xamarin Bindings last month, we expect more and more customers to adopt this, and we want to make sure we create the right experience for you guys. The sample for iOS is available already, and the Android and combined one, Xamarin Forms one, is coming up. So just due to the nature of our product being an SDK for mobile apps, any new OS releases for Android and iOS are pretty important to us. And our developers spend a significant amount of time trying to figure out any work required to make sure that our current scenarios are still supported, and if any new APIs are released that might kind of affect our kind of container story, we make sure that that's being either blocked right away or managed through an Intune app protection policy, which was basically that blade that you saw that Kyle was showing. It's available in through the Intune blade in the Azure portal. So if you guys want more information, definitely take a picture of this slide. The easiest way to find us is through that GitHub link, MS Intune App SDK. And then any documentation on our Intune Docs page will definitely be linked through there, and you can just go on an adventure clicking through all of those things and learn a lot about our product as well. And also come find us at the mobile device and app security booth. We'll be there to talk a little bit more to you guys and really learn about how you're using Intune if you're already doing so, and if we don't have time for questions at the end of this. And now I'm going to pass it on to Dave, and he's going to talk to us about the Microsoft Graph API and how to leverage that with Intune.
All right, thanks, Aswari. So actually what I wanted to do, because the graph side is really IT Pro administrator focused, and all of the things that Aswari and Kyle have talked about are on client side or end user side app development, I wanted to take an opportunity right now to open the floor to questions for Kyle and Aswari, because the two aspects of this particular presentation are fairly diverse. And I know a lot of you are here for app development on client side. So if there's anybody that has questions, you can go to the mics, and or we can repeat them for Aswari and Kyle. Yeah?
I get a few, so maybe I can wait until the booth. But the first and most important is MSAL. It seems to be really, really good SSO experience for us. And that's kind of what we've been looking for. How difficult will it be to integrate MSAL with Intune? So I think you guys are using ADAL.
So let me just repeat the question. The question is, how difficult is it to incorporate MSAL versus ADAL libraries for app development with Intune? For the SDK.
It's something we haven't investigated yet, but I have seen questions about this come up on several forums. So it's something I'll have to take back to our team, and we'll have to look into it. Yeah, so it's, to be honest, I don't have an answer for you right at the moment, but I could, after the session, we could link up and I could follow up with you. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, at the mic?
Yeah, my just question is same-day support for new app updates, obviously. Everyone gets a new iPhone when iOS 12 comes out. So how close to Intune is the same-day support for when Apple releases iOS 12 to have Intune support for your applications? Is it a week off, or 2 weeks off? Do you guys have any kind of guarantee that you're giving same-day support for OS releases for wrapped apps?
In terms of same-day support, the SDK we will be releasing prior to day 0, because the whole concept of, for you guys, in order for you to see the day 0 support, it requires apps to have integrated the SDK. So what we do is we work with our office teams to get an understanding of their release cadence for when they will be releasing an update closest to that date, and make sure that our SDK is ready for that scenario. And if there is any new APIs that are affected by this, we will release comms in a way that emphasizes, okay, like for this release, for example, in the last release we had drag and drop that was new on iOS. We'll say, hey, for this release, drag and drop is blocked. The next release may not be day 0, but we will be finding a way to manage that and instructing apps to make the changes in order to make that managed. For the wrapper, it's a little bit different. We try to aim for day 0, but I'm going to admit that it doesn't always happen. But at least one sprint off. So for us, it's 30 months or 30 days is something we aim for, and that's definitely something top of mind for us to make sure we accommodate for that. Is there anything you want to add, Kyle? Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Nothing else? All right, let's go ahead.
Okay, one more. What are the simple wraps that the wrapper, like what makes an app simple versus complex for the wrapper?
Well, right off the bat, I think it's stuff like authentication. We typically have the SDK handle any apps that require authentication. And then if there's a lot of scenarios with multi-identity where you can have a corporate identity that has access to the app, and then you can also log in with personal identity, that affects the simplicity of the app. And then the save as restrictions. So if your app has document edits or creations and being able to manage those, I think that would be something that would benefit from being used with the SDK rather than the wrapper. Anything you'd like to add, Cal? Okay, awesome.
All right. So before I dive into some things about Graph API, a couple of raise your hand questions. How many of you had the opportunity to see Yina Arenas yesterday talk about Microsoft Graph and give some demos? It was at the morning session. All right. Yina's with the Graph team, and she's got some fantastic demos. Unfortunately, mine are a little bit less flashy. But I'll definitely see if I can take a couple of hers for some deep dive. But at least you have an idea about Microsoft Graph. Folks are familiar with the concept of Graph and what it's about? Okay. So Microsoft Graph, at least from the Intune perspective, is the way in which you're going to access data and automate the Intune service via Graph's RESTful APIs. So as you're developing applications, and again, I'm going to flip a little bit from developing end user or client applications over to developing applications which are primarily intended for IT pros or your IT staff or maybe management staff for getting information out of Intune about how Intune is managing devices and data in a company. So rather than our client-side apps, all of the data that is in Intune is accessible from a reporting and access perspective. And then for things that you can do in Intune, like for example, creating an app protection policy is one of the things that you can use the Graph API to automate. So Graph API is our way to access and automate Intune service. The graph.microsoft.com endpoint is the one endpoint where all of the Intune APIs that are used for doing this data access and automation are available. And I'll spend some time in Graph Explorer because that particular tool, although it's fairly straightforward in the types of things that you can do in it, is a really great way for you to understand the data that you have in Intune, how it's presented back to you, and some basic things that you can do for automating Intune, at least on a one-by-one operation basis. So we'll spend a little bit of time in Graph Explorer as we get into the demos. Everybody familiar with JSON? All right. So good example of basic JSON text that's used in the context of a PowerShell script here where I'm defining some information about an Android store app. In this case, it's Microsoft Outlook, and there's some associated properties with this particular application. And for Microsoft Graph, once I have that data defined for my particular object, I'm going to do a post against an endpoint, in this case, the mobile app endpoint, and I'm going to present my authentication header and to the specific URI, and that's going to go create for me this application. So I'll spend a little bit of time as well in demo, and we'll create and get some data, and we'll use not apps, but we'll use some other well-formed JSON data to demonstrate this as well. So since I was really impressed that almost every one of you here are either using or are familiar with Intune, that's really great. So when you look at Intune, all of the items over on the left represent the types of objects that oftentimes our customers need to access and get information from, or maybe create or automate. So app protection policies, as Aswari talked about, just the basic information for how you want to protect your applications or the mobile applications themselves. When you're creating a mobile app, you could create a store app, you could create a line of business app, a web link. All of those types of applications represent data sources that you can access via Graph, or you can automate the creation, edit, delete, assignment of those applications as well. Device actions is something that's a little bit probably more particular to help desk. So if your organization or the organization that you're developing applications for has a help desk, oftentimes the Intune console looks like, I'll say, kind of a big scary console, and has a lot of information that oftentimes IT doesn't want their help desk operators to be involved in. And so all of the device actions that are available for a mobile device, like just a simple one such as sync now, go get the new policies, or reset the device, or reboot the device, or lock the device, or maybe even start a remote assistance session. All of those actions are also available via Graph. So what that means is that you can build a help desk application that reskins those particular actions and tailors it specific to the help desk for that particular organization. And that keeps your help desk operators out of the Intune console, where they start to get nosy and they start digging into all of the different other Azure services, and we know, it starts to kind of go downhill from there. You just want them focused on the 5 different tasks that they have available. So device actions are a really important aspect of things that you can automate for Intune. The rest of the ones, they're fairly straightforward: configuration policies, compliance policies, enrollment profiles, role-based access control are the Intune roles themselves, all of those, as well as auditing. I didn't put that up there, but all of the data that we audit is also available via Graph API. So then, over on the right-hand side, oftentimes the scenario for developing automation requires that you get user information or device information out of Azure Active Directory. And if you recall, because Microsoft Graph also has things like mailbox information, SharePoint Online information, supported by Yammer, supported by Teams, all of the data that's stored in all of those services can also be tied directly to the user who was using a device in Intune. So not only do you have just the Intune specific information, but you can gather a lot of data, analytics, and insights from Graph and tie those together in your application as well. So let's switch over to go through a couple of different demos of some capabilities. And first I'll start with just a basic view of Intune. So I've got a tenant that I've logged into, and I've got 10 devices. They're all marked as compliant. And let's go take a look at the equivalent of displaying some of this information by using Graph. So I'll go over to Graph Explorer, and I've authenticated as my David at thundercreek.onmicrosoft.com. And I'm going to go grab a little shortcut here so that I don't have to remember all these long URLs. We'll paste this in, and I'll run the query against Graph, and we'll take a look. If I can get the right keystrokes here. All right. So here's what Graph returned back to us by just asking for my device compliance policy settings state summary. It returns my unknown devices, not applicable devices, and there's a bunch of different categories down here for this particular API, and the compliant device count of 10, in this case, requires remain contact, shows that there are 10 compliant devices. And if we go back to the console, our 10 compliant devices is exactly the same data that we saw via Graph. So the endpoint that the Azure portal is using to display this particular device compliance donut chart is exactly the same one that we ran in Graph Explorer. So that is to say that if you also pull up developer mode and you go take a look at the network trace, and I can go back to, let's say, take a look at device enrollment, and we'll get a overview dashboard here as well. When I go run the device enrollment view and go take a look then in my network trace, I've got a Graph call here for test Intune enrollment / device management, and some additional OData filters and parameters for the data that was shown on the enrollment pane. So by using developer mode, you can easily tie together whatever you see in the console with the actual Graph API call. And a lot of times when I have customers that come to me and they say, where's all the reference material for Intune and I point them to the graph documentation, I've got a link in here for you. When I point them to the documentation and they open up the really long list of all of the different Intune resources, it becomes really difficult to sift out, and I apologize, the table of contents in the documentation could be a little bit better for search. I know we're working on some documentation updates as well, but it becomes a real challenge to figure out exactly the specific information that you saw in the Azure portal when you go look in the reference material. So at least you have a good bridge. By now, you can look up the specific item that's being queried by the console using developer mode. All right, so that's one of our first gets. Let's go take a look at Managed Device Overview. If I go to Graph Explorer and we'll run Managed Device Overview, or put it in the right place. And I sign in. All right. In the Managed Device Overview, if we take a look, I've got some counts by operating system. So I've got a summary set of data that's associated with each of the different operating systems that are enrolled in Intune. And if I go over to my Intune console and take a look under Devices, we'll see the overview donut chart that shows enrolled devices by platform. So I have 5 Android, 2 iOS, 1 Windows, 2 Windows Mobile. And if I go back to Graph Explorer and take a look, that's exactly the same data count that I have here. So the reason why I'm walking through this particular flow is because everything that we do in Azure Portal for Intune goes through Graph. Everything. So that is to say that when I went back and I said access and automate Intune, it's exactly what the product team does for building our UI. We use Graph for accessing and automating everything in Intune. So that means that if you were ambitious, you could build a new UI for Intune. But realistically, you're going to build special applications that isolate out key bits of information that you want to share either as part of an application or workflow or connectivity to other systems. All right, so depending on the audience, and I apologize if all of this is relatively obvious, but one of the things that you can do is add a select to the end of your OData query, and instead of getting a lot of details about each of the individual items, you can limit your list to just specific fields that you want to return. So if I were to run this same query, and here I'm looking at a list of managed devices where I have the device name and the user who enrolled it, if I were to eliminate that select filter and run that query, then the data that I'm going to get back is quite lengthy for each individual device. So you're probably not going to want to return all of that data, filter it out. You're probably just going to want to select the individual fields. So OData filter for select, sort, picking the top 20, selecting values, doing filtering, all of that is available via Graph for all of the Intune APIs. One of the other aspects of Intune is because it's a management system, a lot of companies are really concerned about who did what. And the Intune audit system will report back any change operation that occurred in Intune. So if a user logs in to the administrator console and deletes an application or assigns an application or creates a new one, then any of those change operations are audited, and all of those audit events are also available via Graph. So that means if you're interested in doing maybe a security event analysis to understand why the PIN changed from 4 to to 6, and that policy got deployed to everybody, and now people started getting rather upset that they had to change their pin length, you can quickly and easily understand from the audit system who exactly made that change. And the reason why I bring that up, I know that there are some other systems that are out there where if you were to go, for example, take a look at, I'll look at a device configuration policy. If we took a look at a profile, got an Android configuration device restriction profile. And if I look at the properties of this particular profile, one of the things that you don't see is who last changed it or who created it. So the audit information, which sometimes shows up on the object itself, isn't here. So it's a little bit difficult for you to go back into Intune and understand why a particular change was made or who made that change. So the audit system is your entry point into that. So audit data all available via Graph. The next thing we'll take a look at is roles. So if I go back to Graph Explorer, let's take a look at role definitions. In Intune, we have several built-in roles. And if I look here, sorry, this is still audit event data. If I look, I've got a policy and profile manager role, and I've got a list of all of the permissions that are associated with that particular role. So basic role information, accessible via Graph. And if I go back to Azure Portal, we take a look at all of the Intune roles. We'll see our policy and profile manager is one of the built-in roles here. So I can do a simple get in Azure Portal and get a list of all of the roles. But if I simply change my get to a post and go grab some JSON text that defines a new role, put that in my request body, and run that against the same endpoint, Graph will now create for me a new role. So the same endpoint that I retrieve information, I can either patch or post against to create new objects or update existing objects. So now that I've created that new role, its display name is Graph Explorer role, and the description is created in Graph Explorer. So if we just go back and do a refresh of our UI, we'll see that we now created our new custom role called Graph Explorer role. And the description is created in Graph Explorer. And if we go take a look at the permissions, eventually, I don't have my permissions.
I didn't have that either today in the test portal.
In your test portal, did you create a role?
I was looking at the roles we had, and I was clicking on permissions, and they just weren't showing up.
All right. Live site bug. I'll have to go figure out what's up. So assuming that my permissions are all there and just not being displayed, which I could actually verify if I go grab this particular role ID. Here's the ID that was assigned to it. And if I go back up and add that particular role ID, I can run the query and I need a get, not a post. Thank you. So there's all my permissions. So they're still there. They're in the back end. So we probably have a UI issue. But I can also then do a delete on that particular instance. And I got a 200 back. And so now I should be able to go refresh my list, and my Graph Explorer role is gone. So pretty simple end-to-end, get a list, add a new item, delete an item out of Intune. And that same principle applies for any of the different objects that you have in Intune, whether they be mobile applications, policies, profiles, or what have you. One of the things that may be a little bit confusing from a programmability perspective is the fact that users and groups are listed here in the Intune console. And the users and groups extensions are actually from Azure AD. So if you launch users or groups, you've now gone directly into Azure Active Directory, and up at the top, we actually report out that you're in Azure Active Directory. So if you're looking for the Intune users, you're not going to find them. They're actually Azure Active Directory users. From an administrative workflow perspective, we included those together with the rest of Intune so that our Intune administrators, who oftentimes do things with users and group, didn't have to navigate back over to Azure AD. All right, so any questions about Graph Explorer or the basics of being able to use Graph with Intune? All right, let me go back and we'll talk about a few other important things. So a few things that are coming up with Graph and Intune. How many of you guys want to spend a little bit of time in PowerShell? No PowerShell? Okay. If you're interested in PowerShell, you can come to the booth in the expo, and we've got some PowerShell sample scripts. They're also referenced here in the help material for this particular session. But one of the things that we don't have today is a native PowerShell module for Intune. So we're in the process of building one, and that'll be available directly from the PowerShell gallery. So you'll be able to install module, Intune, whatever the name ends up being. And all of the create, read, update, delete, assign operations, all your basic operations are going to be part of that first release. There's a few more complicated workflows that we'll be building out and adding over the next couple of months and through the remainder of this year. But the first set will be out in the next couple of months. You may have noticed that our Graph APIs were in beta for quite a long time, somewhere around 6 to 9 months. They had all remained in preview. And at the beginning of the year, we GA'd a large set of our APIs. And so month over month, there'll be new APIs that transition out of beta into GA, or out of preview into GA. The best place to understand what has transitioned is to go take a look at the changelog for Graph. That changelog is on the main Graph page and includes changes for all services in Graph, not just Intune. And then, even though we used Graph Explorer and it's a great little one-off tool, one of the things that we'll be putting in are some samples into Graph Explorer so that the tenant, the basic tenant that you use without logging into Graph Explorer will actually have Intune in behind it, and you'll be able to make a whole bunch of different Intune calls as well. So that's work in progress. The last thing that I'll say is on user voice. This is a place, if you haven't had the opportunity to go take a look, user voice is where we collect a lot of information from our customers about what it is that they want to see changed in Intune. There are many different pipelines into the Intune team, but on a monthly basis, as we do all of our sprint planning, we'll go look at the list of changes that have happened in user voice, which things are ticking up, which things are ticking down, and what are our highest interest features that are listed in user voice, and we'll include that in our Intune monthly sprint planning process. So I would encourage you to put your requests out in there because those are directly heard by the engineering team on during our planning process. So if you're developing against Microsoft Graph and Intune, there's a couple of, they're kind of good to know, kind of gotchas, depending on whether or not you've been frustrated with some of these things. But for any application that you develop, a global administrator is going to have to consent your app to run in their tenant. And this is one thing that oftentimes when a customer is new to application development with Azure and Intune, they have the mistaken belief that a global administrator needs to run the app. In other words, they think that somebody who's a global administrator needs to log into that application that you've developed, and they need to be the one running the application, which is not true. I know you guys get that, but that's one point that oftentimes is of value to share with your customers as you're developing apps, or if you're internally developing applications for your organization, you'll need to talk to whomever is a global administrator and get consent for your application to run in the tenant. The next thing is you've got to have a set of proper permission scopes for your application. And of course, I would recommend that you use the minimum set of permission scopes. And if you look in enterprise applications, when you're granting API permissions, as you're registering your application, there's a whole set of them for Intune, for all of the different major resources. And right now, all of those are categorized in two groups, read-only and read-write. So if you need to make any changes, you'll need the read-write permission scope. If you're just doing read-only operations, use read-only. Delegated versus app-only permissions. All of the Intune APIs today require delegated access. And that means that one way or another, you're going to need to account for the fact that an interactive logged-on user is going to need to present a token for that Graph API call. Now, I realize that that isn't ideal, and so one of the things that we've got under investigation right now is how do we support app-only permissions to access Graph? So rather than allowing a interactive logged-on user credentials to come along with your application for delegated access, we're looking at app-only permissions. If you have scenarios around app-only permissions, I'd love to hear them, because as I'm gathering all of the requirements and the use cases, it really helps for our internal team to understand the breadth of different scenarios that you want to be able to use to access Intune from app-only perspective. Paging. We didn't talk about paging as I went through some samples, but several Intune customers have over 100,000 managed devices. Several of them have thousands of applications that they've either brought in from stores, or in certain cases, they've developed over 3,500 internal line of business applications, which is a lot, and they've put them all in Intune. But what it really means for you as a developer is that you need to consider, whenever you're returning lists of information, that you're going to come up against 1,000 instance limit per page. And so you'll either need to use next link or skip tokens to be able to get to the next set of data that's paged out of Graph. So that's one of the gotchas that oftentimes when I see people first getting started with Graph, they'll run a query and they'll say, where's all the rest of my data? I went against managed devices and somehow we lost 4,532 devices because I had 5,432 yesterday. And I only got 1,000 back. So paging is something that you're going to need to consider as you're developing your applications. Because we're using delegated, any of the authenticated user that's making a call to Graph needs to have an Intune license associated with it. Just a requirement, but it's one that oftentimes trips people up because you'll get a forbidden message back from Graph. And that forbidden message will oftentimes lead you down a access denied or a permissions type of troubleshooting path, when in fact it's just the fact that there's not an Intune license associated with the user that's authenticated from your Graph call. And we covered a little bit about auditing, but auditing is automatic for any change operation. So you don't need to make a specific API call if you want to ensure that any of the app actions that you're performing through Intune get audited. Our auditing layer is underneath Graph, so any calls into Graph automatically are audited for change operations. And lastly, Intune roles. So Intune roles are also honored below the Graph layer. Even though you need to use permission scopes for your applications and ensure that you've got those granted for your application, when you present a authenticated user to Graph, that authenticated user can be either an Intune service administrator and have full permissions to do all things in Intune. They could be a global administrator, but that's not the best idea. So if they're an Intune RBAC role user, then you can very specifically limit the actions that that particular logged in user can perform. And RBAC will enforce that. So for example, let's say that the authenticated user was a member of the policy and profile built-in role. That policy and profile manager role does not have the ability to create new applications. But if your app went to go create a new app and the user who was authenticated was a member of policy and profile, you'll get a 403 returned back to you because Intune RBAC has said that user doesn't have permissions to perform that operation. So you need to account for that as well. And one of the reasons why I showed the ability to create a Intune role, a custom Intune role, is now you know what you need to know in order to create a role that has only the specific permissions for your application to run. So maybe in the initialization or setup code for your application, one of the things you can do is you can go create what will eventually become a well-known Intune role for you as your application that has only the minimum number of permissions. And that's always good to socialize with the security department or your IT department. Hey, here's my application. I've ensured that it has minimum permissions to go perform only the operations that are required. That also means that Intune scopes are applicable for your application as well. And an Intune scope limits who you can perform those actions against. So if we go back to our help desk sample, you remember I said that you could perform a remote task like a sync. Well, another remote task is actually a factory reset. And that's a fairly impactful event for an end user to have a device reset on them. Now, maybe it's something that your application wants to do, but maybe IT says, no, you can't do wipes. So you can create a role, and you can guarantee that through scope, that particular role can't wipe any of the user's devices because users are not included in the scope for that particular role. So you can leverage Intune RBAC to really help build out the security story for your application as well. We talked about data access, and one of the core scenarios that a lot of IT departments want to use Graph for is reporting. And there are actually two different data stores that we have Intune information in that people need to report out of. One of them is the operational store, and that's everything that I've been demonstrating with Graph today. The operational store contains all of your managed devices and application and the current status of enrollment of those devices or deployment of those applications. But on a daily basis, Intune will take a snapshot of some key information and roll that over into a data warehouse. It'll also flatten all of that data in the data warehouse and provide a much more effective and I'll say streamlined and fast data retrieval of that information out of the data warehouse. The primary purpose of the data warehouse is really for trending and long-term analysis of what's been happening in Intune. So rather than knowing what happened today or what happened with the last operation where you'd get out of the operational store, trending and analysis is going to come out of the data warehouse. And that actually is a separate API. So if you haven't had the opportunity to take a look at where to configure that, if I go back to my Intune console and go to my overview, over here on the far right is set up Intune Data Warehouse. And when you click that, you get a couple of things which are helpful to get you started. One of them is you get the URL. So I mentioned the Data Warehouse API. That's the endpoint that you want to be able to connect to get your data warehouse information. And then we also have a sample Power BI file that you can download that has a bunch of pre-populated reports for you. So you can understand exactly what the backend looks like in the data warehouse. That's all represented in that Power BI module. And you can just run that against your current tenant. So it's really intended to be a simple, easy way for you to understand exactly what Power BI and the data warehouse can offer from a reporting perspective. All right. The last thing that I want to do is share with you some other things that are possible. And these are the result of specific conversations with customers that our product team has had about how they want to leverage Graph. And so you may find your particular use is in this list, but there are others that hopefully this will help you spark a little bit of imagination of other ways that you can develop applications against Intune. We talked about help desk operators, and there really are a lot of scenarios around tailoring a help desk operator application just to your specific company's business process. And that can also be tying to other workflow systems, because I know a lot of ticketing systems, we don't have ticketing in Intune, and that's oftentimes a really important aspect. So not just being able to track and manage tickets, but within that ticketing system, you can just call Intune APIs to perform help desk operations. When customers purchase and approve applications, we have no app approval or workflow in Intune for that. So if an end user requests some particular application, which may be a fairly expensive application, could be a Windows application that costs several $100s, oftentimes that needs to go to a manager for approval and to the purchasing department. And all of that workflow really ends up wanting to loop back to the requester the deployment of the app. So the requester says, I'd really like AutoCAD, and that needs a bunch of approvals. That goes through, finally gets paid, gets pushed into Intune automatically, then gets deployed to the user's desktop who had initially requested it. All that workflow can be coordinated, and the end result, which is the user gets the application, can all be coordinated through Graph. As well, line of business application development, there's a lot of customers who want to be able to deploy to a proof of concept environment to do their testing and validation. They don't want to deploy to the production environment. But at the point in time that the application is working and ready and everything is good to go, you do want to ensure that exactly the application and all the metadata that you tested and validated gets pushed into production. And it's I'll say, essentially trivial to export out all of the JSON for that particular application that you did the testing and validation, and then just go create that back in Intune in your production tenant. Human resource applications oftentimes need to manage the employee onboarding and offboarding process. And when that relates to a user's device, you want to ensure that that device is wiped and no corporate data is on that. So you may have HR folks who have no idea whatsoever about an Intune Azure portal, and you probably wouldn't want them going to the Intune Azure portal, but you do want to say the employee is now left the company, and the result is that Intune calls out and issues a remote wipe of all of the company data from all of the devices that they had enrolled. And from DevOps perspective, there's, again, migrating from proof of concept to production environments, doing your testing and validation, that happens very easily and can be coordinated through Graph, or doing ad hoc reporting. Archiving is another business process that Intune doesn't offer the ability, but it's very easy to export out, and you can export out as a CSV file all of the data that defined all of your configuration and compliance policies, and just store them off in an archived format, or connect to a SIEM system for alerting, monitoring, or other operations. So I promised you a couple of resources if you want to take a screenshot of this, or get a copy of the PowerPoint from the build site that'll contain all of these links. I didn't cover the PowerShell Intune samples, but the Intune samples that are there are intended to give you your basic create, read, update, delete operations for all of the primary Intune resources. But there's one key one that you're going to want to take a look at, which is line of business application upload. That particular process right now has code which is essentially baked into the Intune Azure portal and is not exposed via Graph. So that PowerShell script goes through the requirements for creating a SAS URI to upload to, shows you how to do the encryption of your file and how to upload in chunks all of the application that you need to get your line of business application into Intune. So if you're trying to automate the process of app creation. That line of business will cover Android, iOS, and MSI files for line of business upload. All right. And now you get the please do your evaluation. So we've got a couple of minutes left. I'll open the floor if there's any questions on either the graph side or any other questions that came up for Kyle and Aswari.
I have a DevOps question. So basically, you guys make a lot of really amazing tools. I look at VSTS as a pretty amazing product. I look at Dev Center, or they call it App Center now. Why isn't there a build step in VSTS that automatically pushes my apps for Android and iOS to Intune, then automatically a build step that pushes that to Dev Center, so Dev Center automatically kicks off my tests. The item actually goes into App Center, downloads Intune, downloads my app, runs my unit tests against it, and reports back what's going on. Because you guys own all these products, right? And the whole thing is, I get the PowerShell thing, but a lot of times in iOS, you have to run that on a Mac, because that's how you build applications. Those PowerShell scripts a lot of times don't work without massive modifications.
Yep.
And so I would just like to see better integration between VSTS, because that's what every developer wants to use, right? It's really great. We really want to use App Center. We really want to use Intune, but we want a complete experience from Microsoft that just gives us a turnkey solution.
Yep.
Versus cut and pasting a massive amount of stuff to try to keep everything connected together.
You don't want to be the glue. You want us
I don't
want to
be the glue. I just want to write apps.
Sure. So it's a timely question. I've had some conversations in the last 2 weeks with the App Center folks, and so we're in the process of figuring out what the end-to-end workflow is so that we can do that App Center integration. So that, and you're not alone in wanting to do all of this. I've had several customers, and that's why I had that particular item on there for the app development. Customers really want to be able to just automate this. One of the key requirements is app-only permissions, because if you really want your service-to-service to handle all of that connectivity and go do everything, so that's one of my prerequisites, and I got to get that piece done. But rest assured, I'm talking with those folks, and we're working on that particular problem as well. All right, anyone else? Yeah.
You were talking about a new UI for Intune as one of the things that Graph allows you to do.
Yep.
What about a new UI for Company Portal? So meaning bringing Graph to the IWS services that are called from Company Portal. Is that something
Okay. So your question is, would we be able to bring Graph to the Company Portal, or would we be able to reskin Company Portal?
Not necessarily reskin, but basically those right now those IWS services that are being called from Company Portal.
Oh,
right?
expose the IW services through Graph.
Yeah.
We don't have any plans for that right now. But what I would say is, if there's specific use cases that you have where you want to call the IW service, like if you want to get a list of apps for a particular user, or you want to get the featured apps, or you want to get the company branding information or the IT contact information. If there's specific things that you're interested in, add those in user voice so that we have a record of what it is that you want to make available. Right now, Company Portal is the only entry point for the IW service. And right now, I'm not aware of any plans that we have to make that either publicly available via Graph or publicly available as a documented endpoint.
Like one obvious use case is Amazon lets you push to Kindle devices right from one portal. So if I'm logged in on one device and I want to push an app to another device, that'd be really cool.
Okay, so that particular use case where I'm logged on the Company Portal on my iPhone and I want to push it over to maybe my desktop while I'm away from the office, and so that it's there, that wouldn't necessarily require us to make the APIs public. But that's a great use case, and I think that's another separate one that would be great to get recorded. All right, anyone else? All right, thank you so much for your time. I hope this was incredibly valuable, and love to see your applications as you develop them. Come find us. Show us.